Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim. The great Mushaf and monumental Rihal of Samarkand. I'll start with a quotation from the Holy Quran. We have sent down the message and we will assuredly guard it. In the summer of 1868, Vasily Vasilyevich Radlov, 1837 to 1918, a young Turkologist, ethnographer and archaeologist, described exploring the great decaying Islamic monuments of Samarkand, following bitter conflicts which had just taken place between occupying Tsarist forces and those of Bukhara and Kokand. I quote, "When I rode into Samarkand, the bazaar was mostly a pile of ashes and debris, above which were high columns of smoke. The streets from the destroyed houses were half an ashen deep, covered with a thick layer of clay dust. At each step, the horse made a cloud of dust rose up, filling my eyes, mouth and nose. It was difficult to breathe or see anything. The population, especially the scholars, after their betrayal and fearing the revenge of the Russians, fled, and even the surviving part of the bazaar was almost completely empty. It is clear that under such circumstances I had to be content with visiting the ancient monuments of the city. The most magnificent of all the madrasas and truly splendid buildings of the time of Timur is the Madrasa-i Khanum, mosque and madrasa complex of Bibi Khanum, who was the senior wife of Amir Timur. The dome of the mosque is very high. The decoration on interior walls have completely fallen away. The dome is cracked and a gap has formed more than an ashin in width. Still, the structure is so strong that it has been standing thus for decades with little change. Inside the mosque there is a huge table in white marble. Vasily Radlov was already earning a reputation for his pioneering studies of Turkic cultures, but did not recognize the significance of the great table he saw. Erected at the heart of what was Samarkand's Juma Mosque, it was in fact the monumental reading stand, or Rihal, Lao, for one of the earliest, most important and largest surviving manuscripts, Mushaf, of the Quran. The Hungarian Arminius Vambary recorded that he had seen a huge book of the Quran written on gazelle skin and placed on a lectern inside the museum of Amir Timur. Although this is the first known eyewitness account by a European of a great Quran in Samarkand, it had long been deeply revered there by local believers who understood it to be one of the definitive copies, Mushaf, commissioned by the third caliph Uthman bin Affan, 579 to 656, for distribution to the main cities of the Caliphate. What is more, it was believed to be the very Quran which Uthman was reading when assassinated in 656, the stains of his blood still visible on the pages, open at the moment he was attacked. This particular Mushaf was probably brought to Samarkand by Timur from one of his campaigns in the Middle East. He built his mosque, one of the greatest in the Islamic world, after another campaign in India, where he was impressed by its wonderful creations in marble. His use of massive carved blocks of marble of the highest purity for the great Rihal, decorated with exquisitely carved ornamentation and abundant Quranic inscriptions, would have emphasized the reverence Timur accorded the holy book. However, as grand as the mosque was, it was structurally unstable and soon started to collapse, accelerated by the periodic earth tremors of the region. By the time Tsarist forces took control of Samarkand in 1868, it was in a perilous state. The great Mushaf had already long been in the care of the mazar of the esteemed Naqshbandi Sheikh Khoja Akhra, 1403 to 1489, on the city's outskirts, where it was also displayed on important religious occasions and treasured by the pious as a source of blessing. Major General A.K. Abramov, the newly appointed governor of the Zarafshan military district, soon became aware of the ancient Quran's existence and significance and quickly acted so as to acquire it from the leaders of the Khoja Akhra Mazar. He forwarded it to General Konstantin von Kaufmann, Governor General of Russian Turkestan, who then sent it to St. Petersburg as a gift to the Imperial Public Library. His accompanying letter of 24 October 1869 to the Minister of Public Instruction reads, and I quote, "The commander of the Zarafshan district has handed over to me a Quran, which previously was in the possession of the Mosque of Khoja Akhra in Samarkand. Being aware of the great value of this Quran and its sacredness in the eyes of the Muslims, Major General Abramov commissioned the commander of the Samarkand district, Lieutenant Colonel Serov, to investigate whether the acquisition by us of that manuscript would in any way violate the religious susceptibilities of the community. The ulema of the mosque and certain honourable citizens testified, 1, that this Quran, though it was permanently deposited in the mosque of Hoja Accra, did not really belong to it, but was regarded as the possession of the crown, being the property of the Emir of Bukhara. 2, that this Quran is at present of no importance either to the Muslim community or to the mosque. Formerly, indeed very long ago, it used to attract many worshippers, but lately only the emirs arriving at Samarkand have worshipped before it, and that nobody is able to read it, and that for years it has been lying around without any use. Thereupon, Major General Akramov received the book, and in return for it donated from his own money 500 kokans, 100 rubles, with which the clergy of Samarkand were completely satisfied. End of quote. Donation of the Mushaf of the Quran was applauded in the Tsarist capital. Interest had grown in Russia since the late 18th century in the scholarly study of Islamic texts and in popular printings of the Quran. As early as 1786, Catherine the Great had sponsored a pioneering printing press for Tatar and Turkish orthography in St. Petersburg, where a Quran was printed in 1787 and reprinted in 1790 and 1793, followed by another edition in Kazan in 1803. Although the Mushaf had been removed from Muslim lands, which was to spark much later controversy, it had become available for study by Russia's leading Orientalists. A.F. Shebunin published the first detailed description in 1891, considering that the volume had been copied in the 8th century and possibly from one of Uthman's original master copies. In 1905, S. Pisarev published a facsimile lithographic edition of some 50 copies, of which half were given to Muslim dignitaries and the rest offered for sale. This Mushaf is one of the oldest surviving Quranic manuscripts and is written in an early version of the Kufic script on parchment leaves 68 to 53 centimeters inside. Please note that the images you're seeing now are of a version of this Quran that still remains intact in Cairo. Although incomplete, by comparing it with the best preserved early monumental Mushaf, whose text is similar and which may be contemporary, originally housed in Cairo's Al-Hussein Mosque, as we see here, it is calculated that this massive book would have weighed more than 80 kilos. Since Shebunin, scholars have agreed that the manuscript is not one of those commanded by Uthman bin Affan. While opinions differ as to its date, all fall between the second half of the 8th century and the early 9th century. Opinions differ also about where it was made, but there is agreement that it was ultimately derived from one of Uthman's master copies. Following the October coup of 1917, the Bolsheviks, led by Lenin, seized power. Since the revolutions of 1905 and 1907, Russia's Muslims had raised an increasingly determined and influential voice. Although Lenin was an atheist, he was also a politician who knew that the act of returning the great Quran of Osman would be positively received. On 14th December 1917, the Territorial Muslim Congress of the Petrograd National District addressed the People's Commissariat of Nationalities Affairs, stating that, I quote, Osman's Quran, a sacred treasure and heritage of the whole Muslim world, ought to be with the Muslims. I quote, quote. All the Muslims of Russia crave for it. On 19 December 1917, the Soviet of People's Commissars decreed that the Quran should immediately be returned. It was brought to Ufa, where it was received by the Muslim Spiritual Council of Russia. However, the Muslims of Central Asia were not satisfied. Both the Turkestan ASSR administration and religious figures continually pressed for its return. Finally, on 18 December 1923, it was brought to Tashkent in a special railroad car. However, by that time, official attitudes to Islam were hardening, and it was only in 1941 that the Mushaf was placed on extended public view in the History Museum of the Peoples of Uzbekistan in Tashkent. In 1989, it was given to the Spiritual Council of Muslims of Uzbekistan and can now be viewed in the Muyi Mubarak Madrasa in Tashkent, where it is carefully preserved. In 1997, UNESCO recognized the Mushaf's global significance to humanity by placing it on the Memory of the World Register. A memory of the Mushaf's long sojourn among the peoples of Samarkand survives in the great marble Rihal, which still sits in the immense open courtyard of the Bibi Khanun complex in Samarkand. It was moved there in 1875 after the mosque had so deteriorated that it was no longer used. Now more a curiosity than a religious relic, it awaits its return to its place of honor before the mihrab in the center of Timur's mosque, now restored, where it supported that great early copy of the Quran, the book at the very heart of the Islamic faith.